The shuttle broke through the purple clouds of Prime, and Commander Jake felt his stomach drop as the alien city came into view below. Towers of black glass rose from the ground like giant teeth reaching toward the sky. Rivers of silver liquid flowed between the buildings, and small flying craft moved through the air like insects around a hive. He had seen pictures during the briefing, but nothing had prepared him for the real thing. Lieutenant sat beside him, and her face was pressed against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. Behind them, Sergeant Danny Torres checked his uniform for the 10th time and muttered something about wanting his sidearm. They had been very clear about weapons. None were allowed in the presence of their king. 14 months they had traveled through the cold emptiness of space to reach this world. 14 months of recycled air and freeze-dried food in the same faces every single day. Earth had sent them as ambassadors to make first contact with the Empire, and the weight of that responsibility sat heavy on Jake's shoulders. Every word he spoke would represent all of humanity. Every mistake could cost them everything. The shuttle landed on a platform of polished stone, and the doors hissed open. The air that rushed in was warm and smelled like copper and something sweet that Jake could not identify. A group waited for them at the edge of the platform, and Jake had to stop himself from. They were tall, so much taller than humans. The shortest one stood nearly 8 feet, and their bodies were thin and angular like they had been stretched on some cosmic rack. Their skin was pale blue and seemed to shimmer slightly in the light of their twin suns, but it was their eyes that caught Jake's attention. Solid gold without any white or pupil, just pools of liquid metal that watched the humans with cold curiosity. The leader of the group stepped forward and spoke in a language that sounded like wind chimes being struck by rain. The translator in Jake's ear converted the sounds into words a moment later. "Welcome to Prime. I am Minister. You will follow me to the palace. The king is eager to meet the representatives of humanity." Jake gestured for his crew to follow. They walked through streets of black stone past buildings that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it. Citizens stopped to watch them pass, and Jake could feel their golden eyes tracking every movement. Some pointed and made sounds that the translator identified as laughter. Others simply stared with expressions that might have been disgust or fascination or both. The palace rose at the center of the city like a mountain made of crystal. Light bent and scattered through its walls, creating rainbows that danced across the surrounding streets. Guards in armor of silver metal stood at every entrance, and their weapons with energy that made the hair on Jake's arms stand up. Minister led them through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered with images that told stories Jake could not understand. Wars and conquests and celebrations that had happened before humans had even learned to use fire. They were old, so much older than humanity, and they wanted everyone to know it. Finally, they reached the throne room. It was massive. The ceiling disappeared into shadows high above, and the floor was polished obsidian that reflected their images like dark water. Columns of crystal lined the walls, and between them stood nobles in robes of ivory. They all turned to watch as the humans entered, and the silence was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. At the far end of the room sat King. His throne was carved from a single piece of purple crystal, and it seemed to pulse with inner light. His robes were silver, and they flowed around him like liquid metal. A crown of twisted gold sat upon his head, and his face carried the weight of centuries. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire chamber without effort. "So these are the humans." Jake stepped forward and bowed as he had been taught, and Danny did the same behind him. "Your Majesty, I am Commander Jake of Earth. We come in peace, seeking friendship between our peoples." The king leaned forward, and those golden eyes studied Jake like a scientist examining a new species of insect. "Friendship, yes, we have heard this word before. Many young races come to us speaking of friendship. They smile and bow and say pretty words. But we have learned that all species want something. Tell me, human, what does your kind want from the—" Jake had prepared for this question. He had practiced his answer 100 times during the long journey. "We want to learn, Your Majesty. Your civilization has existed for thousands of years while ours is still young. We want to trade knowledge and culture. We want to grow alongside you rather than apart from you. We believe that together our peoples could achieve great things." King made a sound that the translator struggled with. It was something between a laugh and a sigh. "Pretty words indeed. Your species has a talent for them, it seems." He waved one long-fingered hand, and a servant approached carrying a tray of cups filled with dark liquid. "You will drink with us. It is our custom when receiving guests." Jake took a cup and raised it to his lips. The liquid was thick and tasted like honey mixed with something bitter. It burned pleasantly as it went down. "You have come a long way, Commander, through dangers and hardships that few races would endure. This shows determination, perhaps even courage." The king sipped from his own cup. We shall see if humanity is worthy of our attention, for now you are guests of the Empire, you will be given quarters in the palace, you will attend our ceremonies and observe our ways, and when we have learned enough about you we will decide what relationship our peoples shall have." He waved his hand again in dismissal. "Minister will show you to your rooms, rest now, tomorrow we begin." As they were led away through the winding corridors, Jake felt move close to his side. "He is testing us," she whispered. "Every word and every gesture, he wants to see what we are made of." Jake slowly, "Then we show him exactly what humans are made of." But even as he said the words, he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The way the nobles had watched them, the way the king had smiled, there was something hidden beneath the surface of this place, something dark. And Jake had a feeling they were about to discover exactly what it was. 3 days passed on Prime, and each one felt longer than the last. Jake and his crew were treated like guests, but also like animals in a cage. Servants brought them food that looked strange but tasted surprisingly good. Guides took them to see temples and monuments and gardens filled with plants that glowed in the darkness, but always there were eyes watching. Always there were whispers in languages the translators could not catch. They were fascinated by humans in the way that children are fascinated by bugs. They wanted to see how the small creatures moved and ate and spoke. Some of the nobles asked questions that seemed innocent but carried hidden insults. How did humans survive with such weak bodies? How did they build starships with such limited intelligence? How did their species manage to not destroy itself given their violent nature? Jake answered every question with patience and grace. He smiled when he wanted to shout. He bowed when he wanted to stand tall and proud. This was diplomacy. This was the game they had to play if humanity wanted a place among the stars. On the fourth night, a messenger came to their quarters. The king requested their presence at a grand banquet in there. Jake dressed in his finest uniform and made sure, and Danny did the same. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt important. The banquet hall was even larger than the throne room. Tables stretched across the floor in long rows, and hundreds of nobles sat eating and drinking and laughing. Floating crystals provided light that shifted through like a slow heartbeat. Music played from somewhere unseen, and it was beautiful in a way that made Jake's chest ache with feelings he could not name. King sat at the head of the main table on a throne that had been brought in just for this occasion. He smiled when he saw the humans approach and raised his cup in greeting. "Commander, come, sit beside me. Tonight we celebrate the arrival of humanity to Prime." Jake took his seat and tried to ignore the stares of the nobles around him. Servants placed plates before them filled with foods he did not recognize. He ate what he could and pretended to enjoy the rest. The king made conversation throughout the meal. He asked about Earth and its oceans and mountains and cities. He asked about human history and wars and achievements. Jake told him about the great monuments his people had built, about the art and music and literature that defined their culture, about the dreams that had driven them to reach for the stars. As the meal ended, King stood and raised his hand for silence. The entire hall fell quiet in an instant. "Tonight we have seen that humans are not the simple creatures we expected. They have passion and ambition and a hunger for growth that reminds us of ourselves when we were young." He paused and looked down at Jake with those golden eyes. "And so we have decided to them with a gift." Servants entered the hall carrying a chest made of dark wood and metal. They set it before the king and stepped back, gestured, and one of them opened the lid. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The chest was filled with gold, but not ordinary gold. This was gold, and it shimmered with an inner light that seemed almost alive. The most valuable substance in the known galaxy. A single bar could power a starship for decades. There had to be 50 bars in that chest, maybe more, enough wealth to change humanity's future forever. "A gift," the king announced, "for the people of Earth, a token of our respect and our willingness to consider them as partners in trade and friendship." The nobles applauded, and Jake knew he should say something. He should accept the gift with gratitude and humility. He should thank the king and promise that humanity would prove worthy of such generosity. But something had caught his eye. In the corner of the hall, behind a screen of carved crystal, he saw movement, a shape that did not belong. He looked closer and his heart stopped beating for a moment. It was a woman, a human woman. She was thin and dirty, and her brown hair hung in tangles around her face. Her wrists were bound with glowing restraints, and her eyes were hollow with suffering. She looked at Jake through the gaps in the screen, and in that look he saw 2 years of pain and loneliness and desperate hope. Jake stood slowly. The hall fell silent again as everyone watched him. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was calm even though his blood was boiling. "Before I accept this gift, I must ask you something." The king tilted his head with curiosity. "Ask." Jake pointed toward the screen in the corner. Who is that woman, and why is she locked up? The silence that followed was different from before. It was heavy and dangerous, like the moment before a storm breaks. The nobles exchanged glances and the king's smile faded. That is not your concern, Commander. She is a criminal, a trespasser who violated our sacred territories. She is human. She is property, the king's voice hardened. By our laws, her life was forfeit when she entered our space without permission. We have been merciful. We have allowed her to live as a servant rather than executing her as we had the right to do. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at the chest of gold and then at the woman behind the screen. She was trembling now and tears ran down her dirty cheeks. Property, Jake repeated the word like it was poison on his tongue. This is the way of the galaxy, Commander. The strong take from the weak. Surely humans understand this concept. Your own history is filled with such practices. Jake looked at and Danny. He saw the same anger in their eyes that burned in his own heart. He saw them waiting to follow whatever he decided. He turned back to King and pushed the chest of gold away. I do not want this. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. The king's golden eyes widened and then narrowed with cold fury. You refuse our gift. Do you understand the insult you offer us? I understand perfectly, Your Majesty. Jake stepped forward until he stood directly before the king. You can keep your gold, I want the girl instead. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Everyone in the hall stared at Jake with expressions ranging from shock to outrage to something that might have been fear. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sound was the soft humming of the floating light crystals overhead. King rose from his throne, and his full height seemed to fill the entire room. He was nearly 3 feet taller than Jake, and his shadow fell over the human like a dark cloud. You would trade a fortune beyond measure for one insignificant female. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. Either you are the bravest creature I have ever encountered or the most foolish. Jake did not step back. He did not look away from those golden eyes, even though every instinct told him to run. She is not insignificant, Your Majesty. She is human. She is one of my people, and that makes her more valuable to me than all the gold in your empire. The king laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. It was sharp and cold like breaking ice. One of your people, you do not even know her name. You do not know where she came from or what crimes she committed to end up here, and yet you would sacrifice everything for her. Yes, why? Jake thought about the question. He thought about all the training he had received and all the speeches he had memorized and all the diplomatic protocols he had studied. None of them covered this. None of them explained how to make an alien king understand something that should not need explanation. Because that is what humans do, he said finally. We do not leave each other behind. We do not abandon our own no matter the cost. It is not logical, it is not practical, but it is who we are. The king descended the steps from his throne until he stood directly in front of Jake. Up close, his skin seemed almost translucent, and Jake could see dark veins pulsing beneath the surface. We have studied your species, Commander. We have watched your planet for many generations. We have seen your wars and your cruelties and your endless capacity for destruction. You enslave each other, you murder each other over land and resources and ideas, and now you stand before me speaking of loyalty and sacrifice. He leaned closer until his face was inches from Jake's. You are hypocrites, all of you. You are right. The answer seemed to surprise the king. He pulled back slightly and his golden eyes narrowed. We have done terrible things to each other, Jake continued. Our history is written in blood and suffering. We have enslaved and murdered and betrayed our own kind in ways that shame us to this day. But that is exactly why I cannot leave her here, because we have learned from our mistakes, because we have seen what happens when we treat each other as property rather than people, and because every time we failed to protect one of our own we swore that we would do better. He pointed at the woman behind the screen. She represents everything we are trying to become. If I walk away with your gold and leave her in chains, then I am no better than the worst moments of our history, and humanity will never be worthy of a place among the stars. The king was silent for a long moment. The nobles watched and waited, and the tension in the hall was thick enough to taste. You speak well, Commander, but words are easy. Let us see how far your conviction goes. He snapped his fingers and guards appeared from the shadows. Bring the female. 2 guards went to the screen and dragged the woman forward. She stumbled and fell to her knees before the throne, and Jake saw that she was even thinner than he had first thought. Her arms were covered with bruises and scars. Her clothes were torn and filthy, but her eyes were alive with fierce determination. Tell me your name, Jake said to her gently. Sophie Carter. Her voice was hoarse like she had not spoken in a long time. I was part of an exploration mission. We got lost and crossed into their space by accident. They killed the others. They kept me alive because—" She stopped and looked away. "Because you were young and strong," the king finished for her. "Because you could work. Because watching a human serve our lowest servants amused certain members of my court." Jake felt rage building in his chest like a fire seeking air. He wanted to wrap his hands around the king's throat. He wanted to make him pay for every bruise and every scar on Sophie's body, but he forced himself to stay calm. Anger would not save her. Only words could do that now. 2 years, Sophie whispered. 2 years I have been here. I thought no one was coming. I thought everyone had forgotten about me. No one forgot, Jake told her. Your ship was listed as lost in an accident. We did not know you were here, but I know now, and I am not leaving without you. King crossed his arms over his chest. And how exactly do you intend to take her commander? You have no weapons, no army. Your ship is small and fragile compared to our fleet. If we choose to keep her, there is nothing you can do. You are wrong, Your Majesty. Explain. Jake turned to face the assembled nobles. He saw their golden eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. He saw the guards with their energy weapons standing ready. He saw and Danny behind him waiting for his signal, even though they all knew there was no fight they could win. Right now there is a ship orbiting your planet, Jake said, and on that ship is a communication system connected to every human colony and station in the galaxy. If I do not return safely with Sophie Carter, every human being will know what happened here. They will know that the Empire enslaves innocent people. They will know that you offered us gold while keeping one of us in chains. He turned back to face the king. And then you will learn what humans do when someone hurts one of our own. The threat hung in the air between them, and Jake could see the calculations happening behind the king's golden eyes. They were an ancient race, and they had not survived for thousands of years by being stupid. They understood power, they understood consequences, and now they were trying to understand humanity. You would start a war over one female, King said slowly. You would send your people to die by the millions for a stranger you met only moments ago. I would not start a war, Your Majesty. You would. By refusing to release her, you would be telling humanity that our lives mean nothing to you, that we are property to be taken and used as you see fit, and that is a message we cannot allow to stand. Your fleet is nothing compared to ours. Your technology is primitive. Your species has only traveled among the stars for a few generations, while we have ruled this sector for ages beyond counting. All of that is true. Then you know you cannot win. Jake shook his head. Winning is not the point. We do not fight because we know we will win. We fight because some things are worth fighting for even if we lose. Because surrender is worse than death. Because every human child will grow up knowing that their people did not abandon one of their own even when the odds were impossible. He gestured towards Sophie, who still knelt on the cold floor, with tears streaming down her face. She is worth more than victory, Your Majesty. She is worth more than survival. Because if we let you keep her, then we prove that humans can be bought, that our loyalty has a price, that we will trade our souls for gold and safety. He shook his head. And that is something we will never do. The king stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back up the steps to his throne. He sat down and rested his chin on one long-fingered hand. You truly believe this, every word? I do. And your people, they would truly go to war for her? Without hesitation. King looked at Sophie and then at Jake. He looked at and Danny standing behind their commander with expressions of absolute determination. He looked at his nobles and his guards and his advisors who all waited for his decision. Tell me something, Commander. In all your history, has humanity ever truly united for a single cause? Have you ever set aside your differences and your conflicts to fight as one people? Jake thought about the question. He thought about the wars and the divisions and the endless arguments that had plagued his species since the beginning. No, he admitted, not completely. We have always been divided by nations and beliefs and interests. We fight among ourselves as much as we fight against others. Then how can you promise that your people will rally to save this one woman? Because this is different. Jake stepped forward and his voice grew stronger with conviction. When humans disagree about politics or religion or economics, we argue and compete, and sometimes we even kill each other. But when an outsider threatens one of us, everything changes. Our worst enemies become our closest allies. Our deepest divisions heal overnight, because whatever differences we have among ourselves, they are nothing compared to our hatred for anyone who would harm our people. He pointed at the king with an accusing finger. You have made a terrible mistake, Your Majesty. You thought you could test us by offering gold while keeping a human slave. You thought we would take the easy path, but instead you have given us something that will unite every faction and nation and colony in human space. You have given us a common enemy. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Some of them whispered to each other in their chiming language. Jake could feel the mood in the room changing. The arrogance was fading. Something else was taking its place. "You speak of your species as if they are special," the king said quietly, "as if no other race in the galaxy would do the same. Maybe they would, maybe loyalty exists in species we have never met, but I can only speak for humans, and I am telling you with absolute certainty that we will never stop fighting for each other. It is not a choice, it is who we are, it is written in our blood and our bones and our souls." Sophie looked up at Jake with wonder in her eyes. "You really mean it," she whispered. "You would die for me." "I would die for any human," Jake told her, "and so would billions of others. That is what we do, Sophie, we protect our own." King rose from his throne again. His expression had changed. The cold arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect. "In all my centuries I have never met a species quite like yours, Commander. You are small and weak, and your lives are brief flickers in the darkness. And yet you burn so brightly. You feel so deeply. You love and hate and fight with an intensity that we lost ages ago." He descended the steps slowly until he stood before Jake once more. "Perhaps we have something to learn from humanity after all." He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A servant rushed forward with a key and began unlocking Sophie's restraints. She collapsed into Jake's arms, sobbing with relief. "Take her," the king said. "She is free." Jake held Sophie tight and felt her thin body trembling against his chest, moved forward to help support her, and Danny watched the guards with suspicious eyes. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Do not thank me yet, Commander. This was only the beginning. We have much to discuss about the future of our peoples." But even as the king spoke, Jake could see something in those golden eyes, something hidden, something that had not yet been revealed. The test was not over, not yet. Sophie clung to Jake's arm as the servants removed the last of her restraints. Her legs were weak from years of captivity, and she could barely stand on her own, wrapped a cloak around her thin shoulders while Danny kept his eyes on the guards. The tension in the hall had not faded. Every noble watched the humans with expressions that were difficult to read. King returned to his throne and sat down heavily. For a long moment he said nothing. He simply watched the humans with those golden eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall across countless centuries. "You have surprised me, Commander. In all my years I have hosted representatives from hundreds of species. They came seeking trade and alliance and power. They bowed and scraped and said whatever they thought would please me, and when I tested them they failed, every single one." Jake looked up from Sophie. "What do you mean tested?" The king smiled, but it was different from before. There was warmth in it now, something almost like affection. "Did you truly believe that we keep human slaves in our palace? Did you think that the mighty empire would concern itself with one lost explorer from a young species?" Jake felt confusion spreading through his mind. He looked at Sophie and saw the same bewilderment in her eyes. "I do not understand." King gestured and a door opened at the side of the hall. Through it walked a group of dressed in simple robes, but walking among them were humans, 3 men and 2 women, all looking healthy and well-fed. They smiled when they saw Jake and Danny. "The crew of the exploration ship that entered our space 2 years ago," the king explained. "All alive, all treated as guests in a facility on the far side of our world." Sophie stared at her former with tears streaming down her face. "But I saw them die. I saw the guards execute them right in front of me." "You saw an illusion, a projection designed to make you believe you were alone. We needed your fear to be genuine. We needed your suffering to be real, because only then could we truly test the species that came to save you." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "You tortured her for 2 years just to test us." "We did not torture her, Commander. She was given food and shelter and medical care. The restraints and the bruises were applied only hours ago when we learned your ship was approaching. We needed the scene to be convincing." The king leaned forward. "And before you judge us too harshly, consider what we have learned." He stood and spread his arms wide, addressing the entire hall. "For centuries we have watched the younger races and found them wanting. They come to us with promises of friendship, but when we test their loyalty they always fail. We offer them wealth and they take it gladly even when one of their own suffers in chains before them. We have grown cynical. We have come to believe that all species are the same, selfish, greedy, willing to sacrifice anything for power." He looked at Jake with something like wonder. "But you refused the gold. You demanded the girl. You threatened war with an empire that could destroy your entire civilization. And you did it for a stranger, for someone you had never met and would never see again." He shook his head slowly. "In all our history, no species has ever passed this test until today." Sophie's rushed forward and embraced her, she in their arms asking questions than they could answer. Jake watched them reunite and felt the anger in his chest slowly fading. Why, he asked finally, why go through all this? What were you trying to prove? King descended from his throne for the last time. He walked to Jake and placed both hands on the human's shoulders. Up close, Jake could see the age in those golden eyes, the weight of centuries pressing down. We were trying to find hope, Commander. They are old, so old that we have forgotten what it means to feel. We build our empire through logic and calculation. We measure all things in gold and power, and somewhere along the way we lost ourselves. He looked at his nobles. We no longer fight for each other, we compete and scheme and betray. Families are tools for advancement, friends are stepping stones to power. We have everything except the one thing that matters: connection, loyalty, love. He turned back to Jake. When we first detected your species, we were curious. You were so young and so passionate. You made foolish choices and irrational decisions. You loved people who would never love you back. You died for causes that would be forgotten in a generation. He smiled. And you. Jake did not know what to say. He had prepared for many things, but not for an ancient alien king confessing his loneliness. We created this test hopping to find something worth believing in, a species that still remembered what we had lost, and today you showed us that such a species exists. He snapped his fingers, and servants brought forward the chest of gold once more. Take this gift, Commander, not as payment for a transaction, but as a symbol of true friendship. Take your people and return to Earth. Tell them that the Empire wishes to learn from humanity. Tell them that we offer not just trade and alliance, but something more precious. We offer our respect. Jake looked at the gold and then at Sophie and her crew. He looked at and Danny, who stood ready as always. He thought about the long journey home and the even longer journey ahead as two civilizations learn to understand each other. Thank you, Your Majesty. We accept your friendship, and we will teach you whatever we can about what it means to be human. The king, that is all we ask. As they walked out of the palace toward the waiting shuttle, Sophie moved close to Jake. She was still weak and leaning on for support, but her eyes were bright with something that had been missing for 2 long years. You really would have started a war for me, she said quietly. Jake looked at her and smiled, without hesitation. Why? He thought about the question as the purple clouds of Prime swirled overhead. He thought about Earth and everyone he had left behind. He thought about the future and all the challenges that waited. Because that is what we do, Sophie. We fight for each other, we protect our own, we never give up, and we never leave anyone behind. He put his arm around her shoulders. That is what it means to be human. Above them, the stars waited, and somewhere among those distant lights, humanity was taking its first steps into a future where they would never walk alone.